All right, I think it's fair to get on with business now. Let me introduce our first speaker, Todd May. He is one of the smart people in Huntsville. I can guarantee you that. Todd is the program manager for the Space Launch System at NASA. Todd is leading the nationwide team developing America's next heavy lift vehicle for deep space exploration and science. With that, let's welcome Todd.
Thank you, Mark. You want me to draw another one for me?
No, that's it. I don't have any more problems.
Thank you, Mark. And thank you, folks, for having me today. This is, I think, my third opportunity to speak to this group in the last 5 years, and I love this forum. I love this idea of a corridor of various communities where we practice co-opetition. And, you know, co-opetition is that where you actually compete with each other, but you look for that intersection in the Venn diagram of what you both want to achieve to make yourself stronger. And to give you an example of what I mean by that, the last time I spoke was up in Oak Ridge, and I just happened to be walking in with Congressman Kramer about the same time, and we were walking along, and I won't say who, but another local congressman drove by, and he was driving a brand new black Volkswagen Passat, and he said, "Hey, Congressman, how you like my new car?" And if you're from Chattanooga, you get that joke. But that's important, and Bud smiled back and said, "Next time," you know. So we understand that. We understand that competition. We live in a country where that's important. But it's also important to the story of Huntsville and the work we're doing now. So after World War II, many of you might know this, but there was a competition for an Air Force wind tunnel. And it came down to Tullahoma, Tennessee, and Huntsville, Alabama. And actually, Tullahoma won and beat Huntsville out. And so as a consolation prize, Huntsville got the Army Ordnance Depot, and a year later got the Rocket Research and Development Program. And history has shown that turned out to be actually a pretty good consolation prize. And so you know, that's one of those things where, you know, it's been 60 years ago, and we were competing back then, but we still find that intersection in the Venn diagram. And to illustrate that, there is a Boeing engineer today working on the core of the Space Launch System who for 40 years has been driving down for Tullahoma every workday to work on that program. And that is dedication, and that just shows you how as a community we work together. And so, you know, 50 years ago, 60 years ago, I don't know if you go down there now, but you know the biggest attraction in Huntsville, Mayor, is as everybody knows, is the Watercress Museum, and people come from all over the country. It's kind of like the Garlic Festival out in California. The watercress in Huntsville is the best in the world, and people come from all over the world to see it. And of course, that's not true. We've evolved, and when you come now, Dr. Deborah Barnhart hosts one of the best tourist attractions in the United States, the Space and Rocket Center, and you can see the iconic Saturn V there. Pay attention to that picture, because at the end I'm going to show you another picture, and Deborah's going to like it, I'm sure. But we're really proud of our heritage there. We're proud of what we've accomplished in Huntsville, and specifically today I'm here to talk about the Marshall Space Flight Center, and then specifically about the Space Launch System. But for those of you who don't know, Marshall Space Flight Center has a lot to do with rocketry. The space shuttle, which flew for 30 years and assembled the International Space Station, all the major propulsion elements of that vehicle and that system were managed by Marshall Space Flight Center. Every major engine development in the nation has come through Marshall Space Flight Center, including those nasty Russian RD-180 engines. We actually tested those for flight on the Atlas V at Marshall. But it's better than that. When you hear about the International Space Station, anytime you ever hear about that, a lot of people don't know, every single module that's on the International Space Station built in the United States was built, designed, tested in Building 4708 at Redstone Arsenal. And it gets better. This is what we call the HOS. This is where every payload on the International Space Station is commanded from this facility out on the Arsenal. And when Hurricane Ike went through Johnson Space Center, they actually gave us the car keys, and we actually ran the International Space Station out of Huntsville for a while they regrouped. Every one of you that have children that are in middle school or high school today, if you go look at their science textbooks, you're going to see amazing pictures from deep space. It's the thing that makes our kids think further than just their current surroundings, and makes us think deeply about the entire universe. Those pictures come from spacecraft like the Hubble, which was managed out of Marshall Space Flight Center. Chandra, which has more than doubled its life. And by the way, Hubble's been running for 25 years. Those systems were designed and developed at Marshall Space Flight Center. When you hear about missions like Dawn and Deep Impact and Kepler, all the probes that go all over the solar system, that program office, Discovery New Frontiers, is at Marshall Space Flight Center. When you hear about, when you watch NOAA and a hurricane comes through, and you always notice the credit to NASA for the images you're getting, that's coming through the NSSTC right across the street from UAH. So we're really proud of what's going on there at Marshall in general. But that's not the primary reason I'm here today. I want to talk, first of all, about NASA's mandate. And I love this for a vision statement, but this is our vision statement. We reach new heights and reveal the unknown so that what we do and learn can benefit all humankind. That's not like the Postal Service, that's not like HUD, that's not like the VA. This is a worldwide type thing where we lift human spirit to make us think beyond ourselves. And that makes it a great place to work and makes for a great mission. Many of you might think that, about 4 years ago, hey, where did NASA go? With the shuttle retiring, people felt like, hey, NASA's going away. I can tell you we're not. The space shuttle flew for 30 years, and it put big things up into low Earth orbit, but it was limited to about 200 miles away. And once we built the station, there really wasn't a justification for that particular architecture anymore. So we retired it. We've also used it to move humans to and from low Earth orbit, but since we weren't moving the big cargo, we basically had to bifurcate. And so we're bringing on a whole armada of commercial crew and cargo capabilities to low Earth orbit. And so when you hear commercial crew and cargo, that's really important because today, in the interim, we're dependent on the Russians through the Soyuz and Progress vehicles to get that stuff up there. We've actually already brought along 2 providers for commercial cargo. We're now starting to work on the commercial crew piece. But the part about reaching new heights, none of those architectures are going to get you there. If you want to reach new heights, if you want to go back to the moon, if you want to go to Mars, go to deep space, you need a rocket like the one you saw out there. It's no surprise that it's about as big as von Braun's rocket. It's a completely different class of vehicle. And so when we talk about the moon, that's 1,000 times further away. When we talk about asteroids, that's another 10 times further. When we talk about Mars, that's another 10 times further. We're talking 50 million miles away. You're going away for a year or more when you go to Mars. When we talk about Europa, for science missions, what's really neat about Europa is scientists predict that it has twice as much water as Earth. So if you really mean that you want to move out into the solar system, you want to get to Europa because humans can't live without water for very long. So we're building the rocket that's going to take you there. And it's really no different than history. I think you all probably understand that as humans, we want to explore, we want to push boundaries, we want to push limits. This has been going on since the dawn of mankind. One of my favorite explorers is Captain Cook and the idea of a great ship. Deborah and I have talked about this quite a bit. Being a Navy person, I think she gets it too. But, ships that were used for merchant ships in and around close to shore. And by the way, when I say commercial crew and cargo, we're bringing commerce up into low Earth orbit with humans. We're expanding the frame of commerce into low Earth orbit. But those ships could not go across the oceans into the deep place where you lose sight of shore. Captain Cook and his guys went around the world. And so when they got on their ship, they weren't coming home. At least back before Captain Cook, they did not, most of them didn't come home because of scurvy. Now, he was a little bit different. He took Joseph Banks, who's a botanist, with him. which is important, by the way, the idea of science and exploration going together. And he taught them how to eat native plants wherever they went, and none of his crew died of scurvy, and that was the first explorer where that ever happened. But the really important part from my perspective is the ship itself. The ships had to be capable and robust and be able to go to lots of different locations and sustain the crew safely for a long period of time. His ships had names like the Resolution, Discovery, Endeavor. You can imagine those sound somewhat like the space shuttle names, and so we understand that connection. When Kennedy gave his speech in 1962 about going to the moon, he talked about space as being the new ocean. He made that connection too. So my point is, if we're going to explore, we need a great ship. And this is our great ship. This is a Space Launch System. After the Space Shuttle retirement, we spent about 2 years working with industry, working with the Air Force, working with our stakeholders to figure out how to field a rocket that would put 70 metric tons into space in its initial configuration, but was capable of evolving to 130 metric tons. And this is it. We also had other constraints. We had to have our first launch by 2017. And we also had a flat funding profile. And for any of you that are out there in development programs, that's a very hard challenge. And I'll tell you, we're 4 years into this, and I'll talk to you in a minute about how we are meeting that challenge. But this is a very venerable ship. The core engines are the RS-25s. They're the same engines we flew on the shuttle. We've got 16 of them. These things are designed to fly 50 times. They're very reliable. They're also very powerful. Just the main engines on this are the equivalent of 18 Hoover dams. One of those engines can empty a normal-sized swimming pool in 25 seconds. These things are very powerful. Those solid rocket boosters on the side each give greater than 3 million pounds of thrust, and they're like a bottle rocket without the bang. We like to say when you light those, you're going somewhere. We flew those for 30 years. These are a little longer than we flew on shuttle. We've actually added a segment to them to give them more thrust. The new part is the core, the stuff down the center, and that is actually we leveraged off of the external tank and the Michoud assembly facility down in New Orleans, where we built the first stage of the Saturn V and where we built the external tanks. And we actually leveraged off the Ares program for the avionics. And then above that, hidden under the American flag up there, is what we call the ICPS. That's actually a Delta IV upper stage. Those are built in Decatur, Alabama today. And in this initial configuration, we've got a smaller diameter Delta IV upper stage under that fairing. And then everything above that, where the NASA meatball logo is and up, is actually the Orion program run out of Johnson Space Center. This rocket is taller than the Statue of Liberty, and in this configuration in 2017 will be 10% more thrust off the pad than the Saturn V. Today, we are moving very quickly towards launch. We have set records so far in our development program. We achieved a preliminary design review in only 21 months. And not only did we get there, it was not a farce review. We had 700 people review what we put on the table, and we only had 150 review item discrepancies written. To put that in perspective, I worked the space station program, and just for the node and lab, when we had our PDR, we had over 3,000 RIDs. This is a very clean design. You can see here it's a nationwide effort. We're in 42 states. We've got over 500 contractors. You see our annual economic impact. This came out of the FY13 economic impact, $4.3 billion across the United States. First launch is in 2017, and contrary to what you might hear out there in the papers, the rocket piece of this program is on schedule for 2017. We actually have on our critical path 5 months of slack to delivery to Stennis of the first core, which will be tested for a full mission duration in 2016. I'm pleased to report that the critical design review of that core kicked off this week, and we have what we call graybeards. It's the folks that have been through this. Some of these guys work the Apollo program, and to the person, I spoke to at least 8 of them in the review. They all said this is really looking good. They sat through 2 days of reviews and said the critical design review looks like it's going to be as clean as the preliminary design. Before I get to this chart, I will say also that beyond design, we're actually also already managing the manufacturing the vehicle. The Michoud assembly facility has been completely redesigned, and what used to take 30 weld stations and 1,200 people, we're now doing with 5 major weld stations and about 300 people. We have made over 19 pieces of flight hardware, and when I say pieces of flight hardware, I mean tanks that are 27.5 feet in diameter and 20 feet tall. We have a weld machine down there. It's a friction stir weld, which is state-of-the-art. It's over 165 feet tall and has accuracy to within 0.02 of an inch. The foundation that we poured for that thing is actually as strong as the foundation for the Shell 1 building in New Orleans, which is the tallest building in New Orleans. And if you've ever seen that, it's a big old building. And we've made over 19,000 square feet of hardware that's starting to stack up down there and get ready for assembly. We've done over 1/2 mile of Pathfinder and qualification welds, and so the core is coming along very well. We have what we call our CITIF, which is where we take all our avionics boxes, and we have that up and running with all the boxes at Marshall, running what we call our version 9 software. And to put that in perspective, when we test the full core stage, we'll be at version 11. We're already at version 9 on our software, running the boxes today in that facility. The ultimate goal, though, is Mars. And we kind of argue a little bit amongst ourselves about what's the best path to get there. You'll see soon, if you follow these things, an NRC report was released yesterday. They recommend what they call a pathways plan, but those pathways all end up at Mars. You can either go to an asteroid, or you can go to what we call a Lagrange point on the backside of the moon, or land on the moon itself, but ultimately we want to put boots on the Mars. But that's going to be really hard. You need to have a habitation module, you need to have a lander, you need to be able to launch back off the surface like when we went to the moon. You need radiation protection. And I know I talked to Chris Clark last night from Y-12. We also would really like to have thermonuclear power source to be able to get there faster and with a higher ISP. And that's another one of those collaboration things. We have a guy, Mike Houts, that's working with the Y-12 folks on that kind of stuff. So we're really excited about it. This painting was done by a friend of mine at Southwest Research Institute, and kind of going back to the idea of Joseph Banks going out with Captain Cook. He's a geologist, and he wants to go to Mars. And I want to be able to take him to Mars, because the synergy between Captain Cook and Joseph Banks was that not only did Banks help Captain Cook's men survive, Banks got to see flora and fauna that nobody had ever seen before, and he discovered things that nobody ever got to discover. We're sending robotic probes to Mars today, but it's very slow and arduous. But if you put a real geologist out there on the field, the thing that only the human can do, find that rock and then go, oh, look, that's curious, I'll go here. And he can do what takes curiosity and spirit and opportunity a year to do, he can do in a couple days. And so the idea of discovery and actually putting human boots there is very important, but also the scientific aspects of it. So there you go, Deborah. This is what we'd like the skyline to look like someday in Huntsville. On the far right there, you see the Block 1 configuration. To get to the other configuration there on the left, you only got to add 3 more things. You add the upper stage, you add a fairing on top, and then eventually you get to the advanced boosters. But someday this is going to be the skyline of Huntsville, and we're going to be talking to our grandchildren about how humans set foot on Mars with these rockets. And we're proud to be part of this team. We're proud of this corridor. I can tell you I'm very proud of the team working on this. I think all of you, every chance I get, I talked to Bob White this morning. You know, when folks come in and tell me how inspired their kids are or their grandchildren about what we're doing here, it makes us really want to get up in the morning. And I think the next panel is going to touch on that. Education is really important because we can build this rocket, but it's going to be around for 30 years. And the folks that are actually going to be flying this thing and the folks that are going to be the astronauts and the scientists are in elementary school today. And we're going to need them to pick up the torch where we leave it off. So anyway, I think that's where I'll leave you. I'll give you one more quote there from Andre Gide. We think this is a risky thing. Exploration, pushing boundaries is never easy, but The American spirit is something that I think the whole world watches, and they're excited about us doing this. So thank you for your time today. If you use Twitter or Facebook or anything, there's our websites, and thank you for your time today.